Hey everyone, how's it going? So, in today's video, we're going to be doing part 2 of our 3-part odyssey to catch all the Pokemon that we can in Sinnoh. In part 1, we just caught all 150 Pokemon in the Diamond and Pearl regional Dex, and man, was it a doozy. Today, we're going to be looking at all the rest of the main series games, and yep, it's going to take us quite a bit of time, so that's all for the introduction. Let's get right to it. So one of the biggest complaints I had about Diamond and Pearl as a kid, and still now as an adult, is how few Pokemon are in the regional Dex. I mean, take a look at this fight with Flint. There are exactly 2 fire Pokemon that he uses, and he's supposed to be the fire-type Elite Four guy. Why just 2 fire Pokemon, you ask? Because those are the only 2 final evolution fire Pokemon in the entirety of the Sinnoh regional Dex. So when Platinum rolled around, Game Freak did something that at the time was completely unprecedented and added entries to a regional Pokedex mid-generation. Sure, none of the Pokemon were technically new and all of them could exist in Diamond and Pearl, but to see them before the postgame was really awesome. A bunch of these Pokemon were just older Pokemon or new evolutions of them, but still, it was a really nice addition and it brought our regional Dex total up to 210. So how many of those 210 Pokemon could you catch in a single playthrough? Well, to start off, you can't catch Manaphy, and you only get 1 starter. This is nothing new, so that's going to bring our total right down to 203. Now, like I said, there are lots of new Pokemon that were evolutions of older Pokemon, but unfortunately, a lot of those Pokemon evolve via trading. And that means there are going to be a new record, 11 Pokemon, yes, 11, that need to be evolved via trading in the Platinum Regional Dex. That is insane. So once again, we have Golem, Alakazam, Machamp, and Gengar, but now we have Rhyperior, Dusknoir, Porygon 2, and Porygon Z, Scizor, Electivire, and Magmortar. Now, a couple people mentioned that you can catch Gengar in the old Chateau. However, this does require a second game, albeit in a very interesting way, and we'll talk about that method a little bit later in the video, but for our purposes, we are talking about a single game, single playthrough, so Gengar still counts, bringing our grand total down to 192. Additionally, they were pretty mean this time around with version exclusives and actually did kind of a weird thing. See, in the past with version exclusives, usually there'd be one line that you couldn't catch in 2 of the 3 versions, and then the 3rd version would have a bunch of random Pokemon that'd be version exclusive. But this time around, they just decided, heck, we'll just make everything that was version exclusive before all uncatchable in Platinum. So that's exactly what they did, meaning the Misdreavus line, the Murkrow line, the Glameow line, and the Stunky line are all uncatchable in Platinum, which, as you might have guessed, is going to mean that we have to own both Pearl and Diamond if we want to fill both this regional Dex and eventually the National Dex, which is a little annoying. Speaking of a little annoying, unlike in Emerald, you can't actually obtain both fossils in Platinum, which is a bit of a letdown, although you can catch both box legendaries, so at least there's that. But as for the fossils, which one you get is determined by your trainer ID of all things. So if you happen to have an odd number trainer ID, well, too bad, you're not getting an armor fossil. And if you happen to have an even number trainer ID, the skull fossil is unobtainable for you. And that's going to bring our total down to 182, and then don't forget our old pal Spiritomb, which needs 2 games in order to be caught, and that's going to bring our grand total down to 181, by far a worse percentage than in Diamond and Pearl. Now, in terms of actually filling the Platinum Dex, I have some good news, but I also am going to have some bad news. So let's start with the bad news. In this episode, we're just using main series games, meaning Manaphy is going to stay uncatchable for now. The other piece of bad news isn't going to be able to be reconciled no matter what, and that's, like I mentioned, you need to own all 3 games. However, because of that, I do have some good news. The one piece of good news is you don't have to do a single reset because you can pick a starter in each playthrough. The other piece of good news is your Diamond and Pearl playthroughs don't have to be that long because both Misdreavus line and the Murkrow line are available fairly early on in Eterna Forest. And as for Stunky, it's just under Cycling Road, which is on Route 206, and I believe you can access it after just having 2 badges, if I'm not mistaken. As for Glameow, I know for a fact you need at least 5 badges because you need to be able to use Surf, and it's on Route 216, which is just to the right of Caniclave City. But that's not too bad, and once you do all the trading, plus all the baloney you need for Spiritomb and the underground stuff, don't forget about that, you'll have 209 of 210. Not too bad as a grand total. At least if you're talking about the Platinum Dex. Because if you're talking about the Gen 4 National Dex, there are 493 Pokemon in it, meaning we have a long way to go. But thankfully, there is both a post-game, which I'll talk about a little bit later, plus 2 remake games, Heart Gold and Soul Silver, which many people argue are the best entries in the entire franchise. Now, Heart Gold and Soul Silver are very different from Fire Red and Leaf Green that are pretty much straight up remakes with a couple added areas. Heart Gold and Soul Silver, with all its minor changes, I would classify as a true reimagining. And I think one thing that really shows it's apart from Fire Red and Leaf Green is how well it's aged. Going back and playing Fire Red Leaf Green for the Gen 3 Catch-em-all, and then Heart Gold Soul Silver for the Gen 4 Catch-em-all, it's really striking how poorly Leaf Green and Fire Red have aged, and how well Heart Gold and Soul Silver has aged. And I think that's because Game Freak was very careful to make minor tweaks to make the game feel a lot more modern. Speaking of which, one of the most surprising tweaks, at least from my perspective, was the fact that they changed completely how the Pokedex worked in remakes. See, if you remember in Fire Red and Leaf Green, not only were you limited to the first 150 Pokemon for like the longest time, but Pokemon that could evolve in Johto, like Golbat to Crobat, would arbitrarily only evolve really late in the game once you've unlocked the National Dex. It was really silly. This time, not only will the Pokemon evolve when the conditions are met, but also the Pokemon that evolve via knowing a move are part of the regional Dex, meaning Yanmega, Licky Licky, Tangrowth, etc. They're now part of the new 256 Johto Dex, up from 251. I honestly couldn't believe Game Freak retconned how many Pokemon were in the Johto Dex, but for our purposes, it's going to make a little bit tricky to compare directly between Gold and Silver and Heart Gold Soul Silver, which you know I really want to do, but we'll use percentages so it'll work out, don't worry. So on that note, let's get right to it. How many Pokemon can you catch in a single playthrough of Heart Gold Soul Silver? So let's look at our Gold and Silver graphic, which, oh my god, I don't know how I used that graphic in a video. I mean, look at all the Pokemon. I mean, it's so hard to even see what's going on here. There are just so many Pokemon you can't catch in a single playthrough. This time around, once again, you're only going to get one starter, that's standard, and the 2 mythicals, Mew and Celebi, are going to be uncatchable, bringing our total down to 248. However, the biggest reason that Gold and Silver had such a poor percentage of catchable Pokemon in a single playthrough was the fact that 17 Kanto Pokemon were limited to Gen 1 games only. This time, all of them are catchable within Heart Gold Soul Silver, albeit only 9 of them are catchable in a single playthrough, including things like the legendary birds and Mewtwo. They actually built a new Cerulean Cave, which kind of is like a cool redesign off the red and blue Cerulean Cave. I really like it. Speaking of cool changes from Gold and Silver, after you defeat Red, you can go to Professor Oak's lab in Pallet Town and get your choice of Kanto starter. Of course, he only gives you one, but the fact that Kanto starters are actually in a Gold and Silver game was really cool to me, and I just found out about this like a week ago. I was completely shocked. I couldn't believe I never knew this. So that's going to bring our total down to 242 because of the 6 Kanto starters you can't get in one playthrough. But hey, at least they're in the game this time around, right? Even when it comes to Pokemon that need to be traded in order to evolve, Heart Gold Soul Silver gives us a little bit of a break, albeit a bit of a tedious one. So you still can't catch Golem, Alakazam, Gengar, Machamp, Politoed, Scizor, Kingdra, Slowking, and Porygon 2 in a single playthrough, but you can catch Steelix. Unfortunately, considering how roundabout this method is to get Steelix, it may be faster just to trade an Onix with a Metal Coat, but if you want a Steelix in a single playthrough, here's how you go about doing it. So, in short, you get one traded from Jasmine. The longer answer is, she doesn't like to trade one so quickly. You need to get at least 16 gym badges, and I believe talk to Professor Oak and maybe beat Red, I'm not 100% sure on that. But either way, after you do all those things, you need to get Jasmine's phone number, but she doesn't just give it to you. If you go to the Olivine Cafe between 1 p.m. and 2 p.m. on a Wednesday, no other time and no other place, she will talk to you and give you her phone number. Now, if you call her between 1 and 2 on a Wednesday, she'll ask if you want a rematch, which will occur at the Saffron City Fighting Dojo. If you defeat her and then fly back to Olivine City and talk to her again, not once, but twice, she will offer a Steelix in exchange for any Pokemon you want. So by doing this little side quest, our total sits at 233 as opposed to 232, but it's going to come down quite a bit more because there are a ton of version exclusives in Heart Gold, Soul Silver. So the version exclusives are pretty much exactly the same as they were from Gold and Silver, with a couple changes. So once again, in Heart Gold, you can't catch the Vulpix line, the Meowth line, the Leddyba line, Skarmory, and Delibird. However, and this is really interesting, in the non-Japanese versions of Gold and Silver, for whatever reason, the version exclusivity of the Teddiursa line and the Phanpy line was swapped. And this time, it's consistent with the Japanese version, meaning you cannot catch the Teddiursa line in Heart Gold, but you can catch the Teddiursa line in regular Gold. Now, the final version exclusives are the Kanto fossils. This time around, you can get the Kanto fossils by smashing rocks in the ruins of Alph, of all things. But the only fossils you can get in Heart Gold are the Old Amber and the Helix Fossil, meaning you cannot catch the Kabuto line. Consequently, in Soul Silver, the version exclusives are the Mankey line, the Growlithe line, the Spinarak line, Gligar, and Mantine, same as Silver. Now the Phanpy line is uncatchable, which is new, and the Omanite line is also uncatchable, bringing our grand total down to 221, because this time around there are no silly complications like the stone problem, and so I think we're doing a lot better in terms of percentages, like 7% better to be approximate. However, where Heart Gold and Soul Silver really shine in terms of their simplicity is catching all the Pokemon in the Johto Dex. Now, in terms of this good news, bad news situation, the good news is it's not Gold and Silver. I mean, rewatch that first video. It's crazy all the combinations we have to do in order to fill out the Johto Dex. This time around, if you just want to stick to Gen 4 games, you can, but you are going to need to play through one game 1 full time and another game 2 full times because of the Kanto starters. If not for them, you could play through one game just up to the 7th gym, or really up to Route 45, because once you get beyond the Ice Path, you can catch the last of the remaining version exclusives. If only you could get the starters without having to defeat Red, this would be so much easier. And at this point, I feel like it's time to move on to the National Dex, because once we start talking about it, we're also going to be talking about a method that may make this process a lot easier. Now, even if you were to go through this painstakingly long process of playing through, let's say, Soul Silver twice and Heart Gold once, in addition to already filling out the Platinum Dex, you're still going to be short 107 Hoenn Pokemon, plus the mythicals of Mew, Celebi, Manaphy, Fione, Darkrai, Shaman, and Arceus. So, how do we catch those 107 Hoenn Pokemon? Well, there are two major methods. The first method is Pokemon migration, and on the surface, it seems like the perfect way to fill out a Pokedex. Just bring all the Pokemon you caught from Generation 3, I mean heck, I did a catch 'em all in Gen 3, I have pretty much all of them. And then bring them into Generation 4. Easy, right? You're funny, other me. No, it's not easy, it's obnoxious and tedious. So what you need to migrate is a DS that accepts GBA cartridges like a regular DS or DS Lite, and you put a DS cart you want to migrate Pokemon from, you pick the game you want to migrate to, and on the title screen, you click migrate. I don't have a DS capture card because I never thought I needed one, so excuse the horrible footage, but yeah. Right away, you're going to notice the first flaw, which is when you try to migrate a Pokemon with HMs, the game doesn't let you. I have no idea why this is, and I've thought long and hard. Is it because they don't want you to get stuck in Generation 3? Is it because they don't want you to cheat in Generation 4? None of those make sense, like at all. Because you can only migrate Pokemon in your box, and you can get stuck through trading anyway. Plus, you can only access the Pal Park, which is how you actually get these migrated Pokemon, once you have all the game completed. So, I don't get it, but whatever. So you first need to go to the move deleter in Lily Cove City and delete the moves of any Pokemon you wish to migrate that has an HM. Then, do what you were doing before and migrate the 6 Pokemon you wish to migrate. Now, I mentioned this Pal Park, what is it exactly? The Pokemon don't go right into your PC? You're hilarious! Oh my god, you should be running this channel, you're really funny. You know, I'd get more views if I were funny like you. But no. No, it goes into this obnoxious area called the Pal Park, which is the most tedious waste of time I've ever seen. Basically, Pokemon go to different areas. There's like 5 areas. 2 of them are water-based, so make sure you have a Pokemon with Surf, and you actually have to catch the Pokemon you already own again. What? Like, are you kidding me? And the Pokemon don't appear right away. The encounter rate is super low, or at least like the chance of getting an encounter, I mean. So sometimes it takes like 30 seconds. It's really, really stupid. Plus, which area the Pokemon are in is usually kind of common sense, but there's like 2 water areas. You have to look it up, and I'm never a fan of that. But anyway, once you've gone through that, and it takes around 5 minutes, you go to migrate Pokemon again, and oh, what's that? You can only migrate 6 Pokemon for every day. Huh. Let me do some quick math-rooney here. Oh, so if I actually tried to migrate, the Hoenn Pokemon I need, it would take over a month. And if I want to migrate every non-Sinnoh Pokemon, it would take 2.5. Cool. That's good game design. So I would be spazzing out way more if there wasn't a flaw in this system. And no, the flaw isn't simply changing the date. If you do that, you get this message. The game actually keeps track of time internally, specifically so you can't do that. And the game knows when you change the clock and then locks you out for an additional 24 hours. Except, it doesn't lock you out the way you think. So what we're going to do to cheese this system is by bringing in a second GBA cartridge, which we don't want to migrate from. So change the clock a day forward and put in this second useless cartridge. Try to migrate from this cartridge and get the message that you need to wait 24 hours. That's great, because for whatever reason, when we put in our original cartridge with the day still a day forward, it'll just let us migrate again. It's kind of awesome. However, this process is pretty time consuming, and even if it weren't, it's so tedious. I mean, there is absolutely no enjoyment I get out of this. So it is just a method I really try to avoid. Plus, if you don't have the Pokemon in Generation 3, you're kind of stuck anyway. So I tried for the most part to get as many Pokemon as I could within Generation 4. But you actually can't get every Hoenn Pokemon in Gen 4. You can't get the Regis of all things. I mean, oh my god, the Regis. They're such powerful legendaries. We had to lock them behind Gen 3. Technically, you can get them in Platinum, but the event to get the Regigigas, which allows them to spawn in their respective locations, is long since passed. So for our purposes, you can no longer get the Regis in Generation 4. Now, if you want to use Gen 4 to get the remaining Hoenn Pokemon, or even to get some Kanto Pokemon and Johto Pokemon a little easier, there are, I would say, 5 major methods, each of which have their good points and their bad points. The first method is the Swarm, which is sometimes the best method to use because when a swarm is occurring, the Pokemon appears at a 40% rate. The problem with swarms is you have no control over which Pokemon is swarming, and from what I've read, they're predetermined and there's no way to manipulate them. So if the Pokemon you need happens to be swarming, awesome! If the Pokemon you need isn't, I mean, if you have some days to waste, sure, you can just check back every day, but sometimes it gets a little frustrating. Thankfully, only Skitty and Delcatty need to be acquired this way. Every other Pokemon can be gotten a different way. By the way to check which Pokemon is swarming is pretty simple. In Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, you just talk to Lucas/Dawn's sister and they will tell you, and in Heart Gold, Soul Silver, Oak's talk show will tell you. Now, our second method is exclusive to the Sinnoh games, and it's called the dual slot method. Essentially, if you put a GBA cartridge in a GBA slot, meaning this only works on DS and DS Lite, encounter rates are changed in various routes, such that these new Pokemon appear at an 8% encounter rate, which isn't that great. Now, for a lot of these Pokemon, it does depend which Generation 3 game you have. So, for example, Lotad needs Sapphire, and Growlithe needs Fire Red, but Gengar will take any Generation 3 game. You can look up the list on Bulbapedia. There are quite a few Pokemon that can be caught this way. And honestly, it's much better over the swarming method because you have complete control over which Pokemon spawns and where they spawn. However, the 8% encounter rate isn't great, and if you don't have the Generation 3 game you need, you're kinda out of luck. However, our next method doesn't require you to own any other games, and that's the Poky Raider, although this method is only applicable to the Sinnoh Gen 4 games. Now, the Poky Raider you might remember from X and Y, and it made a reappearance there, and it does basically the same thing. It's an excellent way to shiny hunt, which is what it's most known for. However, for our purposes, there are certain Pokemon exclusive to using the Poky Raider. Now, these Pokemon can depend on which version you're using, such as Trapinch only appearing in Diamond and Pearl, but for the most part, it's similar between Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, although sometimes it's even different between Diamond and Pearl, so you need to check it out. And this method can be kind of time-consuming, just because of the way the Poky Raider works. Essentially, you press it, and then a bunch of patches of grass start shaking. Now, apparently you can sort of tell which Pokemon is going to appear in a patch of grass based on how fast it's shaking, but I've never found this to be useful. Anyway, once a Pokemon appears, if you catch it or KO it, you continue what's called a chain, and you can go into another patch of grass, and it's actually very likely you'll encounter the same Pokemon at the beginning, which could suck for us because we're only looking for a single Pokemon, not a shiny Pokemon. By the way, as the chain goes up, the shiny rate goes way up, and I think it can get all the way to 1 in 200, or maybe that's an X and Y. Either way, it's a really useful way of shiny hunting. So what I decided to do that made this really easy was simply use a repel, because if I get any encounter that's not the shaking grass, it won't be the one I need, and just save. So if I don't get the encounter I need, rather than restarting the Pokewalker, which takes 50 steps, then I have to use a repel again, and it's a really annoying process, I just reset and then just keep going. I found this sped up the process quite significantly, and I got all the Pokemon I needed via this method. One method that's exclusive to Heart Gold Soul Silver is the radio. Now, I talked about this method in my first video in Generation 4 of how to catch Carnivine very easily, but for our purposes right now, we're going to mainly use it to catch Hoenn Pokemon. Now, the way the radio works is on Wednesday for Hoenn and on Thursday for Sinnoh, although Meditite counts as part of Sinnoh for some reason, I have no idea why. You can access a song in the radio, which if played on certain routes, causes certain Pokemon to appear. Now, I really only have 2 minor complaints about this, because the 20% encounter rate is really nice. So I wish there were more Pokemon you could catch via this method, which is one of my complaints. And the other is simply that once you get into an encounter, the song stops playing, but playing it again is just touching the radio icon on the second screen. So it's not really that big a deal, just slightly annoying, especially when you've been catching Pokemon for like a week straight. Another method exclusive to Heart Gold Soul Silver is headbutting trees. For the most part, trees usually just yield regular regional Dex Johto Pokemon, but there are special trees, usually in hidden areas, that can give you other Pokemon like Tailo, for example. The way trees work is a little bit different than Gold and Silver. Essentially, the trees that will spawn encounters will always spawn them, but it's hard to know which ones will, and you kind of just have to guess and check. The special trees are usually kind of identifiable because usually it's hard to get to them. But the final method that is also exclusive to Heart Gold Soul Silver is the Safari Zone, and boy do I want to talk about this thing. Now let me say that if you watch my first video, I have learned how to use the Safari Zone, and it's not as bad as I remember it. Basically, I was really young the first time I played Heart Gold Soul Silver, or not really young, but young enough that I didn't have the patience to learn how it worked. And now that I know how it worked, I still hate it, and it's still the worst, but it actually can be kind of useful if you dedicate enough time to it. So on the surface, it's just a regular Safari Zone, and you might be wondering where it even is, because there was no Safari Zone within regular Gen 2. It's actually west of Cyanwood City in its own new area. It's a pretty nice little area, actually. The Safari Zone can be accessed right when you can access Cyanwood City, however, you can't really use all its features right away. Once you get to the Safari Zone, Baoba, I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name, that's how I call him, will give you a test to catch a Geodude, which is pretty easy. He's right in the first area, and I think appears at like a 33% rate or something, so really easy to catch that. Once you do, you think more of the features are going to be unlocked, but nope, he says he'll call you back. When will he call you back? Well, if you haven't beaten the game yet, after you beat Price, he'll call you then. But if you have to wait 3 in-game hours for him to call you back. Meaning you either have to leave your DS on for 3 hours, or go find stuff to do for 3 hours, which I was not thrilled with. Why do I need to wait the 3 hours? You can access the Safari Zone. Well, for our purposes, the Electrike line is exclusive to the Johto Safari Zone. I think you can also use Swarming, I'm not sure. But basically, it was the only real way I was going to catch this thing. Unfortunately, while you can use the default Safari Zone layout, it doesn't contain the rocky beach area, which is where Electrike is found. So I had to wait the 3 hours. Sure enough, I get the call, and then I go back. Then he asked me to catch a Sandshrew. I catch the Sandshrew, and I can customize the Safari Zone using this convoluted PC. Wonderful. So I put the rocky beach area right at the entrance because the only one I need, and I go in, no Electrike. Why? Tell me, Bulbapedia, what the hell is this? I mean, seriously, like, what does this mean? Block? Planes? Number? What the heck does any of this mean? Let me tell you, you gotta wait another 3 hours. After 3 more hours, all this is gonna make, well, no sense, but let me explain what happens. After 3 hours, Balba gives you these thing called blocks, and each block is part of a certain class. In our case, we need 10 Plains class blocks in our Rocky Beach area. And if you put 10 plain class blocks in the Rocky Beach area, which is what Bulbapedia is telling us, look at that, Electrike appears. Now Electrike isn't so bad to catch, but let's look at some other Pokemon, like Bagon or Shelgon require more blocks than you actually have. The only way to get them is to wait more time because your blocks eventually will double then triple in power. So like I said, the Safari Zone can actually be very useful, and the encounter rate is always around 10%, so it's not too bad. But oh my goodness, is it ever convoluted to figure out? And I would really rant more, but this video is approaching half an hour and we still have more stuff to cover, if you can believe it. One thing you're going to start to find as you start to evolve Pokemon is you may run out of evolutionary stones. Now, there are an unlimited supply by using the underground in Sinnoh, but there is a method I find a lot more fun in Johto, and that's the Pokeathlon. As a kid, I was kind of indifferent to it, but I have to say, it was a really nice change of pace, and let me just say, Heart Gold Soul Silver, there are so much to these games. Like, oh my god, all the features and little things they added. Like, there is still the Battle Frontier from Platinum, there's a Pokeathlon, plus another thing we're going to talk about in a second. But the Pokeathlon would take a whole video to describe accurately. Essentially, it's a bunch of mini games, kind of like Pokemon Stadium 1 and 2, but all of them are using the stylus. Each Pokemon kind of gets its own Pokeathlon stats, kind of like contest stats, but a lot more fun. And you compete in various contests. I believe there are 5 competitions, and when you win a competition, you get a certain number of points. Once I got kind of good at these competitions, I was getting about 490 points per win, so that was about like 390 per like the activities, and then 100 for victory. So it was actually a lot of fun. I was really trying to get good at these things. If you get really good at these things, you unlock a hard mode, which if you win, you get I think 200 or 300 points, but I never did that. Certain Pokemon are better at some activities than others, like obviously Steelix is good at the strength competition, and Crobat would be more speedy, but I actually had a lot of fun doing this method. The only drawback, it takes about 6 competitions at my rate to get a stone, which is 3,000 points, which is a pretty long time. But there actually is another way to get stones that is really easy that I only figured out shortly before recording this video, and that is, and I didn't know this, when you migrate Pokemon, items go with them. What? Since when has that ever been a thing? I mean, obviously that's the only time it was a thing, but I just got used to the fact items always stayed with the game. So if you had a Pokemon holding an item, it would just go back to the game's bag. But nope, it goes with the Pokemon, which is super cool for me because I have a lot of rare items in Emerald. But what this makes really easy to do is go to Fire Red Leaf Green, buy some stones, give them to some useless Pokemon to migrate over, and there you go, 6 stones to use. It doesn't help with the Sunstone or Gen 4 stones, but that is pretty useful, you have to say. So originally when I scripted this video, I wanted to figure out exactly how many games you needed to complete this Pokedex, but I started to realize as I was answering the question, it's not that interesting of an answer. Because think about it, we have 12 games between Gen 3 and Gen 4 that we could use, and there's a whole bunch of Pokemon that are catchable in more than one of those games. So which games you're going to end up using is sort of a matter of preference. For example, you could theoretically go without playing Platinum altogether, because the only Pokemon exclusive to Platinum, and I couldn't believe when I saw this, is Tropius. I have no idea why Tropius, but if you're using Generation 3, that's not a problem. However, if you do that, there is one Pokemon that's going to be a pain to get, and that's Porygon. In Platinum, you just get a Porygon for free from someone. But in other games, it's not as easy, such as Heart Gold Soul Silver, where to get a Porygon, you're going to need to go to the game corner and buy a whole bunch of coins, except you can't buy coins this time. And Porygon costs 9,999 coins. Thankfully, one of my favorite things about Heart Gold Soul Silver is Voltorb Flip, the thing that replaced the game corner. I guess because of issues in Europe, they decided to do away with the whole gambling thing in a kid's game. I think a pretty good idea, and instead have this really awesome card game that is a mix of luck and skill. Maybe in a video I will talk about strategy for Voltorb Flip, but if you get good at it, while there is always going to be luck, which can be frustrating, you can actually get a lot of coins really quickly. And it took me only about an hour to get Porygon. I actually didn't even need more coins and I was still playing the game. That's how much I like it. Now, I realize that it wasn't the best example because you can get Porygon in the Trophy Garden, which might be easier, but when else am I going to get to talk about Voltorb Flip, honestly? But I think you get the point that it is going to be a matter of preference as to which games you use and which methods you use to get all the Pokemon you need. Now, I'm not sure if any of you were actually wondering this, but in case you wanted to know how I would go about doing this if I had to start from scratch and catch every Pokemon in the Gen 4 Pokedex again, and no, I will never do that again. This was quite an odyssey. I have had enough of Gen 4 Catch-em-all. Thank you very much for one lifetime. I would use 4 Generation 3 games. I try and avoid migration because it's just so tedious, but I'm actually going to get some Pokemon that save a ton of time just migrating as opposed to playing through some games. You'll see in a second. So I'm going to start with Fire Red Leaf Green, plus you need a link cable because I want to get all the Kanto starters in Generation 3. It just is way easier to trade them between the 2 games and then reset way quicker. The other thing I need to get because of the method I'm going to be using is one of the fossils, in my case the Helix Fossil. I'm just going to use Soul Silver and not actually play Heart Gold at all, meaning I need to get the Helix Fossil and revive it into an Omanite before I migrate everything over, which doesn't actually matter too much because I was planning on getting to the Celadon Mart to buy some evolutionary stones to give to my migrating Pokemon in order to make that easier. So it's really only one more badge and then surfing to Cinnabar. You only need 5 badges in order to get to Cinnabar, which isn't too bad. But that is pretty much all I have down for Fire Red Leaf Green. If there are any other Pokemon you could imagine being easier to catch in Fire Red Leaf Green, by all means. But otherwise, let's move on to Emerald. There are a bunch more Pokemon I have as mandatory in Emerald. The only reason I'm going to be using another Generation 3 game, either Ruby or Sapphire, is simply because I want to get all the starters in Emerald. I haven't actually talked about how you get the Hoenn starters in Generation 4, and it is really unintuitive and tedious, kind of like a lot of this catch-em-all process is. Anyway, here's how you go about doing it. When you get access to Saffron City in Generation 4, you can go to the Copycat's house, and she talks about her Dolly Bee missing. Wait, J-Rose, what does this have to do with Hoenn starters? I'm getting to it! So, when you get to the Vermilion City fan club or whatever, you can find her Dolly, and then Steven Stone will talk to you. Neato! Do you actually need to return the Dolly? No, you just have to have that conversation, then you beat Red, then you go back to Saffron City, into Sylph Company, talk to Steven Stone a second time, and he will offer you 1 Hoenn starter. Now, I don't feel like going through, it's actually not that long the first time, but I don't feel like playing through the game 3 complete times, so I'm just going to save myself a lot of time, get all the starters in Emerald, plus they need to evolve to 2 extra forms, so getting the extra experience points, not such a bad deal. The other Pokemon I'm going to need in Emerald are the Weather Trio, because Groudon and Kyogre are also version exclusive, and like I said, only one of Heart Gold or Soul Silver for me. Of course, we're going to have to catch the Reggies in this Emerald playthrough. I've mentioned now a few times how they're uncatchable in Gen 4, so this is why we need to use a Generation 3 game, no matter what. The fossils are also a little bit easier to get in Emerald because you get both of them, so I would revive them and migrate them over. And finally, Skitty and Gulpin are really annoying to get in Gen 4, so I would get them in Generation 3 instead. This brings me to Generation 4. I'm going to be using both Diamond and Pearl because we have to. So I'm going to be playing Diamond, like I mentioned, up to Stunky, and Pearl up to Glameow, and just trade them to Platinum. Platinum, I'm going to catch pretty much everything else because it plays a lot faster. It's a much better game. I'm going to go through the post game because I love the Battle Frontier anyway and catch all those things like Heatran and Regigigas, etc. And then finally, Soul Silver is just going to be a mop-up. Anything else that I couldn't catch in any of the other games, Soul Silver. And that's it. I would probably be using Platinum as what I call my hub game, the game where all my Pokemon are going to eventually be, and that's where I would get the certificate. But that is my plan. That isn't the plan I used because I wanted to try out a ton of different methods, but that is it for this video, and you would think it for Generation 4, but alas, there is one more video that I'd like to make. Because unlike in Generations 1, 2, and 3, there are a ton of mythical Pokemon ready to catch in Generation 4, albeit in the side series. So next video in the Catch 'em All series, I'm going to be looking at all those side series games, kind of doing mini reviews of them. Hopefully you guys will enjoy it, so stay tuned for that, but I will tell you right now, I'm planning on making a few other videos before that. There are a bunch of videos I really just haven't had the time to make because I've been working so long on this video. I also want to do the Catch 'em All series for Ultra Sun and Moon. My exams and essays got in the way of that, so yeah, you know, fun time being a student and a YouTuber. But thank you guys always for your support. We got 25K by the end of November, which is really cool. Thank you guys so much for that, and who knows, maybe by next New Year's we'll be at 100K. That would be, honestly, I really don't even think that's possible. So thank you guys for watching. Take care.